Hello, I'm Jim Gibbons. Welcome to the second in our regular series discussing human rights, brought to you in partnership with Human Rights Without Frontiers. In this programme, we're looking at the exploitation of North Korean workers in Poland. A film dealing with this issue was screened at an event organised within the European Parliament by MEP Laszlo Tökes and Human Rights Watch Without Frontiers. The film, called Dollar Heroes, examines a practice that goes on despite UN and EU sanctions that prohibit the hiring of any workforce from North Korea. With the complicity of private companies and Polish state agencies, North Korean workers continue to work in Poland and to be exploited by Pyongyang, left only with a small personal income of less than $150 per month.
North Korea, one of the poorest countries in the world. Average earnings here are only $1 a month. And yet, despite increasingly stringent UN economic sanctions, somehow it's still getting enough foreign exchange to build nuclear weapons and to finance the luxury lifestyle of its elite. How is this happening?
Well, we got interested in this issue because we read a New York Times article a few years ago about North Korean laborers working abroad earning money for the regime, and we thought that that was quite an interesting story because we'd never heard about this. And the more we researched, the more we found out how big North Korea's network of indentured laborers is worldwide. So it's one of these stories that got bigger while we were working on it.
And did the actual story frighten you?
Yes, it did, because when you listen to the testimonies of these workers, you realize how much pain and suffering they have to go through, and it's really a thing we should all know about and think about.
And what hurdles did you have to jump to actually make this film?
Well, it was probably one of the most difficult films we ever made because a lot of these workers work in countries where the freedom of the press isn't held up high. A lot of them work in China, a lot of them work in Russia, so we had to use undercover cameras, we had to use local teams, we really had to move under the radar in order not to be found out.
What conclusion do you draw from your film? What conclusions do you hope the audience will draw from the film?
This is actually a very difficult question. Which conclusions to draw from the research is hard to answer. It's the plight of these laborers really is something that I think moves everybody who's ever heard a testimony from one of these laborers. And the big question we always asked ourselves is, what can you do against it? Should we stop this? But this really wouldn't help the North Koreans and their families back home who receive some of the money. Should we just acknowledge that, you know, indentured labor is a factor in today's world? No, I don't think we can't do this either. I think there have to be policy initiatives to make sure that these laborers work under conditions that are applicable to other laborers in these countries. So they should have freedom to move around, they should keep their wages, they should keep normal working hours. And then I think this would be a big step to alleviate the pain and the suffering these laborers are under.
You're debuting the film today at the European Parliament. Why is that? What do you hope to achieve?
Well, we hope to make the members of the European Parliament aware of the fact that indentured laborers are working in the European Union under conditions that no law of the European Union allows. So we really have to exert pressure on the countries that employ these laborers to stop these practices.
네, 형님.
나 너희랑 말하면 안 돼. 우리 감시받고 있어. 우리의 돈은 딴 데로 흘러가. 너무 힘들다.
This film gets inside one of the largest and most secretive people trafficking operations in the world.
North Korea is the biggest illegal job agency in the world.
The investigation uncovers North Koreans toiling in Russia, China, and even in the European Union.
넌 네가 사람이라고 생각해? 너는 개고 이 쓰레기나 처먹어. 더 이상 인간이길 포기하라고.
Welcome to the hidden world, are what North Koreans call dollar heroes.
Why did you decide to write this report?
Because the issue of North Korean labor is being exploited overseas, not just in the European Union, globally, is a serious issue, both in human rights terms and in terms of security.
And what conclusions have you drawn?
That this is a widespread, well-established practice that usually receives the cooperation of the host countries.
It's received the cooperation of the host countries, even EU countries?
Even EU countries, yes. It did so in the past at least.
So what is the message you're hoping to bring to the politicians in the European Parliament today?
That if you employ North Korean workers, you are helping their exploitation, and basically you're making it possible, you're enabling human trafficking, because I think that is what we're talking about with regard to North Koreans being ferried across the world, forced to work without getting paid by their government.
Can I ask you why you felt it important to host this event?
We are very much engaged in the human rights issues, being Vice President of the Human Rights Subcommittee in the European Parliament, and on the other hand, as a member of a formerly oppressed people in the time of the Ceausescu dictatorship in Romania, we are very sensible for example, for the oppression of the North Korean people or those living in China, especially in Tibet or in Xinjiang region. And at this occasion, we were very glad to be hosting this important presentation of a documentary film, and to give in such way moral and concrete support for those who have to suffer under the Kim regime in North Korea.
The issue has been actively pursued by Human Rights Without Frontiers. On the 19th of September last, the NGO made a public statement at the Human Dimensions Implementation Meeting, HDIM, held in Warsaw of the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, asking the Polish delegation to the OSCE how many North Korean workers are currently working in Poland and how many work visas have been issued since the last HDIM meeting. Poland's official reply contained conflicting statistics. EU reporters Colin Stevens discussed Poland's action with HRWF's Willy Fortre and also asked what the EU's response should be.
What is Human Rights Without Frontiers calling upon the Polish state to do?
I first want to thank you for that question, because it is an important one. The European Union preaches human rights and European values outside its borders, but sometimes it fails to look inside if those values are implemented by its member states. And as we saw in the film, it's not the case with Poland, where hundreds of North Korean workers are exploited in slavery-like conditions. And despite pressures from NGOs like ours in Europe, but also in South Korea and in the United States and Canada, we have not seen any change in the attitude of Poland. I said slavery-like because those workers work 12 to 16 hours per day. They just have 1 day off per month, and their salary is a maximum of $150 US. So this cannot be tolerated by Brussels. The issue has been raised already by members of the European Parliament through various written questions, but the answers from the Commission have not been convincing at all, and we have not seen any real interest in the Commission to change the situation of those workers in Poland. So what we want to say to the Polish authorities is that they should abide by the UN sanctions and the EU sanctions, but also abide by the standards of the ILO, to stop granting visas, working visas, to those North Korean workers, and mainly to make sure that in the meantime they live and they work in normal conditions according to the dignity values that the European Union is promoting.
And what are you asking the EU, the wider EU, to do?
Yes, it's really a moral duty from the EU and the EU member states to put this issue on their agenda and to put Poland under pressure to abide by the EU values. And if Poland persists in hiring such workers for private companies in Poland, then I think they should consider to start an infringement procedure.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the work of Human Rights Without Frontiers, you can make a donation. On screen now are the details you'll need to do that. Please join us again next month when we will again be looking at other issues affecting the universal and equal application of human rights for all people, regardless of nationality, gender, racial or ethnic origin, religion, language, or any other classification. Goodbye for now.